The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, I rise to take a call on the Telecommunications Development Levy Amendment Bill, which is being rushed through the House during budget urgency, setting aside the normal processes of Parliament to have a select committee hearing and a report back from stakeholders. Why is this happening, sir? Sir, I guess I can only imagine the picture in the Cabinet room when this legislation was mooted, and there was Nathan Guy, bright as a button, poking his eager little eyes up above the Cabinet table and realising that this sounded like free broadband for farmers. Free broadband for farmers. How wonderful the Minister of Agriculture could announce primary industries. He wants a bigger title, Mr Speaker. It happens in the third term of government. The Minister of Primary Industries, not primary schools, primary industries, wanted to be able to say in a press release, free broadband for farmers. National's the farmer's friend. But nobody told him that if you put, oh, there's another farm, he's still alive, David Bennett, haven't heard from him for months and months, but he's still alive, he moves, proof of life, Mr Speaker, proof of life. But nobody told Nathan Guy, PhD, that if they impose a levy on telcos, which is a new tax, it'll simply be passed on to consumers, and in the end, the farmers will pay. And I can see the look on his face now, and the camera can zoom in, the crease on his brow as he realises it ain't as good as it sounded. Now, what is the ostensible purpose of this bill? Well, it's supposedly to fix things called black spots. You're driving through the country, your mobile phone drops out. Well, you know, we are law-abiding citizens. We don't often use mobile phones when we're driving, and if we do, with a rare exception, we always have them on hands-free, Mr Speaker. But there is a thing about Northland. I mean, occasionally members of Parliament were in Northland for the by-election. There was a traffic jam as ministerial LTDs, BMWs, were backed up trying to get into Northland on their shabby rural roads, and it suddenly dawned on ministers you can't actually use a mobile phone through most of Northland because there's almost no coverage at all, even on the main road. So you can imagine their haste as they scampered back to Wellington. They realised that Simon Bridges was a bridge too far and that the good people of Northland wouldn't be fooled by umpty-dumpty years of neglect followed by 10 bridges in 10 days, that they could tell the difference between that and a regional development strategy, and there was a black spot all over Northland. So this bill got rushed through. Mr Speaker, this is yet another example of the National Party hitting the policy panic button. There is no, who cares, says the member at the back. I can't remember his name, but he sometimes speaks in the House, and he says, who cares? Who cares if it's good policy, sir? Who cares if it's a good investment of taxpayers' money? Because it was a bloody good press release. It sounded really good on the news, and that's all that matters, right? Postmodernism got the narrative right. Who gives a toss about the facts? That's the government for you in their third term. Well, you know, here's the issue. Have you heard of Google's Project Loon? Have you heard about that? Do you know what Project Loon is? What is it? He's nodding. What?
They're looking blank.
Balloons. Balloons. Very good. You get a starter for one. Project Loon is a new way of getting broadband to the rural regions by a mesh network of balloons which can broadcast, and that way you don't need expensive lines in the ground or on power poles. Now, it may or may not work at scale around the world, but the point is this. Before you go spending another $150 million of New Zealanders' hard-earned cash, you better look at things like that. And there's two ways to the noisy backbencher on the far side, two ways that can happen. The first is a thing called a regulatory impact statement that tests a whole bunch of options. But the department here in its disclosure has said it really didn't have time for any options analysis because this was a panic button measure, as my colleague Claire Curran has pointed out. So there goes option one. Option two, have a select committee process and hear from the industry. Hear from Vodafone, hear from Chorus, hear from Spark, hear from 2 Degrees, hear from the experts about how they think they can get the most possible broadband to the most possible people in rural New Zealand at the least possible cost. Oops. The government didn't do that either. That is why we are here on the dead of Friday, passing through all stages under urgency this legislation which denies the sector and the public the opportunity to comment. Why on earth would you do that when you're spending $150 million? And I'll tell you what, the industry's hopping mad. They may be the farmer's friend, but they're certainly not the telco's friend right now, because the telcos know this is a muddle waiting to get worse. A muddle waiting to get worse. Let alone that it's a broken promise, let alone that members like Mr Bennett couldn't give a toss about the facts, they're only interested in the media, and let alone the fact that this has not been justified in terms of evidence or a select committee process. This is bad lawmaking, it's a bad process, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the broadband obligation that is contained in this bill will be passed on to consumers. There's no such thing as a free lunch. A telecommunications levy can be levied on the phone company, but of course they will pass it through, and it will be Mr Guy's farmers that he will have to face when their phone bills and their broadband bills go up, because nobody's done the analysis to find the cheapest way to get them the bandwidth. But let's just assume all of those problems weren't there. Let's assume that they had done the homework, they had done options analysis, they were having a select committee process, they had consulted the industry was alongside, and consumers were going to get a good deal. Just assume for a moment that was all true. The other big problem, every time the government goes near broadband telecommunications, nobody hooks up. The government set an objective of 80% coverage for its ultra-fast broadband. Well, nobody was ultra-fast to hook up to the thing. The last time I looked, there was about 3% usage. 3% of New Zealanders had actually ponied up the connection cost to hook themselves to the so-called UFB network. And that was in the cities, where it was easy. Spend another $150 million of taxpayers' money with no select committee process, no data analysis, and no consultation with the sector, and guess what's likely to happen? Sweet nothing, because people cannot see the reason to spend $2,000 or $3,000 of their hard-earned savings to hook up to a system that may or may not work. And that is why there's been a knock-on effect from this government's incompetence through the sector. Here is the sad story, although it's mainly about urban, not rural, but it's relevant. Chorus pressed the panic button. They rang up Stephen Joyce and his sidekick Amy Adams, and they said, hell, we're going to go bankrupt because you put us over a barrel with the UFB rollout costs. It looked okay, but as nobody's actually joining up, no one's using it, we're losing money, please write us a big fat cheque, or words to those effect. And so what did the government do? The so-called economic managers, who are 0 for 7 on running a surplus, they said, sure. They rang up Mark Ratliff and they said, Mark, how big a cheque do you want? He said, oh, well, look, it'll look better if you just let us renegotiate our UFB contracts. And so they did. Chorus shares rose faster than just about any other share on the stock market last year, because the deal that they got out of this brain-dead government was just so sweet, they were rolling in shareholders' funds. And the government got duped. Well, there we are. Here we are again. The government's obviously learned from its mistakes, because it would never again spend taxpayers' money without consulting the sector or having a rigorous select committee process. Oops. Except here we are on a Friday, passing this $150 million new tax through all stages without a hearing. Can New Zealanders see the problem with this process? Well, I'll tell you what, the telco sector can, and even Nathan Guy's favourite farmers will when they pick up the bill. And Mr Guy's smiling face as he lifts himself up to the cabinet table won't be smiling quite so much. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, I've forgotten how bad he...
I call Simon O'Connor.
Not sure who that member was at the back bench of the Labor Party just speaking, but there were two interesting themes. One was about Project Loon from Google, and Labor would know all about that, hot air and balloons floating around the stratosphere. And like the balloon in Missouri recently which crashed to the ground. They also, I see, were talking about black spots, and I think the Labor Party knows all about black spots because most of them would love to have been in a black spot yesterday when they heard their leader's speech, falling on deaf ears, collapsing and crashing to the ground. Mr. Speaker, this is a good bill. It seeks to increase an existing levy in order to roll out services that our people want. I was on a select committee yesterday. We were hearing evidence from people who are saying, look, we want more